Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is Blackstone Sun. Yeah! All right, so I'm putting this one out there because it's finished. Hopefully the follow-up doesn't take me forever. We'll see, but, if you're all sitting comfortably, then I'll begin. All right, so this one begins in Gungywamp, Connecticut. And before we get going, I just have to say that there may not be a more perfect Connecticut place name than Gungywamp. You might actually have to be from Connecticut to appreciate that, but it's true. And I've known about Gungywamp for many years, but unfortunately I've never been, which is too bad really, because it has the markings of a really cool place. It has standing stones, and it has not one but two subterranean chambers, one of which has an equinox alignment inside that points to a hidden chamber within, right? That's some real Indiana Jones kind of stuff right there, which is pretty cool, right? And so Gungywamp also has this circular henge structure that some say represents Turtle Island, because in the Native American folklore of the region, a giant turtle carries the North American continent on its back. But what really makes Gungywamp an interesting place is that carbon dating dates the site to 2000 BC, putting it in use at the tail end of the Bronze Age, not long after Stonehenge or the pyramids at Giza would have been built, if you believe their dating. And there have been alleged 12,000-year-old artifacts found in the area, creating the possibility that Gungywamp could be a Neolithically aged site, putting it on par or perhaps even older than places like Göbekli Tepe. But as with similar mysteries of the realm, the problem with Gungywamp is that no one knows who built it. And of course, theories abound, right? Starting with the mainstream narrative. Who has it that the native Connecticut Mashantucket Pequot Indian tribe evolved out of the Proto-Indian race that came into North America across the Bering Land Bridge, and that the Pequots have been in Connecticut for tens of thousands of years. All right, so it's more probable than not that this is a Mashantucket Pequot site. Others have postulated that it could have been built by some lost Bronze Age seafarers, Phoenicians, or perhaps some Irish monks fleeing Viking raids on their monasteries. Or maybe it was the fancy-pantsed colonists, and this is really just an elaborate millstone, and these mere root cellars, and possibly the one on the left is a root cellar, but the one on the right, I don't know. And as I was reading up on Gungywamp, I learned that no excavation had been done there until the 1960s. And so adding that 1960s date to the bronze and possibly Neolithically aged dating going on around here, my fat senses ran straight to Jimmy Mellert, who Mud City sees as faking Çatalhöyük at the same time. Right? So my apophenia continued to run wild, and this is 100% speculation on my part, mind you, but could Gungywamp be an elaborate hoax? One orchestrated by the Mashantucket Pequots to help bolster their ancient heritage claims. A little more evidence to put in front of a review board or whatever that's going to decide whether or not your tribe gets federal recognition. Right? The longer the Pequots can prove they've been in the area, the better. And as luck would have it, in 1983, they do receive that federal recognition. And within 3 years of that, they open Foxwoods Resort and Casino, a literal cash cow that has raked in billions of dollars over its 40-year history. And not only that, when they mismanage this windfall, which they do, they receive millions in federal grant money. What a racket! Right? And I'm sure there were no kickbacks involved with these grants at all, right? Absolutely not, because that would be illegal. And so, while this idea of the Mashantucket Pequots faking Gungywamp to help get the casino made certainly tickles the old fat senses, this whole story has really just been one long digression, because it wasn't the casino or the Pequots or any of these cool structures that brought me to Gungywamp. It was Mary and a conversation we were having about this subject. And once my apophenia has been activated, it has a mind all its own, right? And as soon as we started talking about this, my apophenia beelined to Gungywamp because I remembered hearing that there were Phoenician symbols found there. And so it was during this little bit of coffee talk that I investigated Gungywamp, and as we learned, there are no Phoenician symbols to be found at Gungywamp, or I would have brought them up. But now I had to ask myself, did I just imagine the idea of Phoenician writing in Connecticut? So, of course I had to continue to look, and I did find a New England rock that has symbols on it that at one time were proposed to be of Phoenician origin. It's just not in Connecticut, right? It's a real mass hole of a rock known as Dighton Rock, located in Berkeley, Massachusetts, which really isn't all that far from Gungywamp. And so Dighton Rock is a 40-ton boulder covered in very enigmatic petroglyphs, which in 1783 were theorized to have been of Phoenician origin by one Ezra Stiles. But knowledge of these markings goes back over 100 years to no later than 1680, when the Reverend Danforth makes a drawing of them. And even the fire and brimstone breathing Cotton Mather includes Dighton Rock in his book, The Wonderful Works of God Commemorated. Right? So Dighton Rock is a wonderful work of God, according to Cotton Mather. And Danforth's drawing from 1680 still exists, though Wiki warns us that it differs from other accounts and the current markings. So let me just tell you how shocked I am that the first known drawing of something differs from how it looks today. I'm shocked, right? So here is the Reverend Danforth's drawing, and I think this thing is pretty amazing, right? It has this certain fluidity that for reasons beyond my control remind me of Atlantis, right? Did the Atlanteans invent the emoji? That's what I'd like to know. And so let's take this drawing in for a second here, because remember, this differs from the other accounts and how the stone looks today. But allegedly, this is what Danforth saw in 1680. And so the next image we have of Dighton Rock is from 1830, so 150 years after Danforth's drawing. And it's this line drawing here. And right away, the differences are glaring. Not only is the flourish and detail of Danforth's drawing replaced by crude line drawings, where did all of this extra shit come from, right? Because Danforth's drawing has none of it. Was all of this added at some point after Danforth made his drawing, or did Danforth ignore it? It really bothers me that I don't know, because it just doesn't seem right to me that he would have left it off if it was on the rock. All right, so there's that, right? And then the earliest photo, which is this 1853 daguerreotype. And so it matches up pretty well with the line drawing, and having this guy sitting on top of it and having the carvings colored in really does help provide some scale to this thing, right? This is not just some small rock we're talking about here. But let's do our comparison in order, right? And start with the 1830 line drawing. And so, artistry aside, you can definitely see some similarities, at least across the top here, with these triangular shapes that sort of remind me of fish. I'm assuming that our emoji guy over here is supposed to be this guy, right? When we get far enough to the right, where did all of this shit go? And what's up with Gleep and Gloop over here? And next to them, this is just a hot mess, right? And then my favorite, right? What is up with this spotted beast? Right? It's got 4 legs, a tail, a huge beak, and horns or antlers or something that appear to be connected to a kite. Right? What is going on with this thing? Were there spotted beasts with beaks and antlers wandering around Massachusetts 4,000 years ago? Because I absolutely love this monster, especially because its tail turns into a balloon that spells the word orphans, plain as day, right? We have this triple X motif over here, because Dighton Rock has been a very naughty rock, and I was that days old when I learned that you can call a compass and a square out of the triple X's. I don't think I ever knew that before. Down here, we have Mr. Hanky, right, and his friend Casper. And I call him Casper because I keep getting this creepy Ghost from Brady Bunch vibes off of this guy, especially off the daguerreotype. Which off to the left has something that looks like a centaur, maybe? Some sort of horse beast with arms, right? Who is absent over here. And the word orphan disappears altogether on the daguerreotype. And Mr. Beast loses his spots. So it's kind of interesting to see these differences. And the daguerreotype does get a little busier over here, making me wonder how much of this was added in the 23 years or so between the line drawing in this photo. And so we're going to wrap it up here on Dighton Rock. But overall, this Gungywamp Dighton Rock rabbit hole was a fun way to spend our coffee talk. We definitely had a good time goofing on these images. But it didn't end there, because at the bottom of the Dighton Rock wiki page, there's a link to a list of individual rocks, right? So you know I had to pull the string on that and see what else was out there, right? And almost immediately, I was blindsided. Pun intended, because scrolling this list all the way down to the letter B, they put this rock in front of me, which hit me like a kick to the face, because it instantly fell into place for me that both Gungywamp and Dighton Rock are on the McHenry Mecca alignment. In fact, it's hard to get closer to the line.
What?
Especially in the case of Gungywamp.
Yup.
And so this inspired me to take a closer look at the McHenry Mecca alignment, beyond what we've already seen, right? And I found some really fun stuff. Least of which is that this alignment comes awfully close to equating the globe, right? But before we get into all of that fun stuff, let's take a closer look at the Black Stone, shall we? Especially because in a perfect Mud City world, the front bastion of Fort McHenry points directly to the Black Stone, splitting these uprights along the way. And for all I've talked about this alignment, I really haven't talked about the Black Stone at all. And so let's start with the basics. Like, what kind of rock is it? And that's a great question, because nobody knows. The Black Stone of the Kaaba has never been scientifically tested or analyzed, making it another mystery of the realm. And as such, theories abound as to its true origin. Right? Is it an agate? Like a geode? Is it volcanic basalt? Meaning it could come from anywhere? Right? Is it a piece of natural glass? Or could it be everybody's favorite but mostly dismissed theory that the Black Stone of the Kaaba is a meteorite, like the fabled Benben stone of Egypt, which was an alleged meteorite? Also, Artemis's temple at Ephesus allegedly housed a meteorite. And this is exciting, of course, because Artemis is Diana, and Diana and this temple were represented at Mrs. Jarley's waxworks party. The caryatide of Diana being played by one Sally Carol Nay White. And so my apophenia wants to run wild and make another connection between Baltimore and the Middle East here. But putting that fun little bit of apophenia aside, very little is actually known about the Black Stone.
How convenient!
The only thing that can be truly known about it is that at one time it was shattered into pieces and glued back together-ish, right? And that in 1814, that tricky Swissman, Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, right, he allegedly went undercover to get a closer look at the stone.
I am in disguise.
And he reports that it is an irregular oval, about 7 inches in diameter, with an undulated surface of about a dozen stones of differing shapes and sizes, worn smooth by all the touchings of the pilgrims. And it appeared to him like lava, so perhaps supporting the volcanic basalt hypothesis. And just a couple years later, in 1817, Ottoman Caliph
I am the greatest.
Muhammad Ali decided he wanted to take a closer look at the stone for himself, right? And for some reason, he allowed Anton Ritter von Loren, or Anton Knight of Loren, to inspect a fragment of the stone.
I'm still the greatest of all time.
And Anton reports that there were tiny cubes of bottle green material embedded inside it, so perhaps supporting the agate or geode hypothesis, right? But really, most of what we know comes from these historical accounts or Islamic folklore. And so, before we discuss all of that, Wiki did feel the need to point out that even though the Black Stone's house resembles the female genitalia, the gatekeepers call this observation dubious. So, I don't know, you can decide for yourself on this one. It's just ridiculous that they would put that in there. Right? But, so let's get to it, right? So what is the story of the Black Stone? And I suppose that starts with what the Muslims believe it is. And they have a few different stories. They mostly all center around the fact that the stone is a gift from God, right? In one version, it's a transmogrified angel who gets turned into stone for dropping the ball and not watching Eve while she's tempted by the serpent, right? And there's also a story that the stone is a gift from God to Adam and Eve to help guide them after they've been cast out from the Garden of Eden. But perhaps my favorite story is that it was a piece of Adam's original altar to Yahweh, or Allah, as he comes to be known. And this original altar was washed away during Noah's flood. But many years later, this piece of it was revealed to Abraham by the angel Gabriel, at which time Abraham orders his son, call me Ishmael, to build the Kaaba in reverence to it. And so the problem with this story is that it has no counterpart in the Hebrew canon. And so as far as the Jews are concerned, it never happened. And this is a complete non-story, right? It means nothing to them. And so that's a little bit of the mythology, but it's with what history tells us about the Black Stone in the Kaaba that this story starts to get interesting, because it turns out that there really isn't anything all that unique about the Kaaba at all, right? Because going back no later than 1,000 years before Muhammad, it was common practice for the tribes of the day to associate certain rocks or stones with their deities, and they would build Kaabas as places of worship or pilgrimage. In fact, there were red and white stone Kaabas not all that far from Mecca. And there is actually a tradition that holds that the black stone was once white and turned black by absorbing the sins of the pilgrims who touched it. And so collected, the tribes of western Saudi Arabia were known as the Nabataeans. And they were a scrappy group of tribes who confederate and carve out a nice little kingdom for themselves in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East region that lasts from about 500 BC until they're absorbed by the Roman Empire under Hadrian. But before all of that, this Kaaba and its black stone were dedicated to the patriarch of the Quraysh tribe of Nabataeans, who held dominion over Mecca at the time. And their chief god was called Hubal, a god more widely known among the other Nabataean tribes as Dushara, or as I like to call him, the douche. Right? And either way, they're the same guy. Right? They're Baal, the big boss, god of the mountain. Because all of these patriarchal gods are merely just regional variations of Baal, right? And I would just like to point out that the Nabataeans appear not to have been above some human child sacrifice, right? Just the way Baal likes it. Or is that Hubal, the douche? And I think I'm going to call Baal the douche from here on out. That's how much I love that. Getting back to Mecca, right, there's this amazing story about Muhammad and this Kaaba that I'm going to let this guy tell you.
Hello and welcome to another video in the series Archaeology and Islam. My name is Dan Gibson, so let's first start with the god Hubal. He was the god of the Quraysh tribe, the highest god for them in pre-Islamic times. This idol was so important that Muhammad's grandfather, his name was Abdul Muttalib, he took young Muhammad down to Hubal, down to the temple, and had him dedicated to the god Hubal. Both Ibn Hisham and Al-Tabri tell this, so it comes from trusted sources.
That comes from trusted sources. So as far as academia is concerned, Muhammad was dedicated to Hubal, who's really the douche. Right? That is just unbelievable. Making all his future actions in service to Hubal, the douche, Baal, actions like placing the black stone in the eastern corner of the Kaaba, right? Because the story goes that after hundreds of years, the Kaaba needed an upgrade. And I bet it kind of looks like this behind whatever this is, right? And when the builders were finished building this new Kaaba or refurbishing it or whatever they did, right? They couldn't decide amongst themselves where to put the black stone. So they grabbed Muhammad, who's essentially just wandering around Mecca, living in a cave outside of town, plagued by these intense dreams of revelation. And today, no one would look twice at this guy. Right? He would just be another crazy homeless person living under a bridge, right? But, not back then, I guess, because the builders put their faith in this wandering madman. And he chooses to put the black stone in the eastern corner. And this is where the story levels up, because this eastern placement aligns the black stone with the rising of the star Canopus. And this is along the Kaaba's major axis, while the minor axis aligns with the solstices. And so, surprise, the Kaaba is a solar clock as well. Who knew? I certainly didn't know. Right? And, Canopus is the second brightest star in the night sky. Right? And it is amazing what they can tell us about this star that's 310 light years away. All hail spectroscopy. Because, here's an artistical representation of it, right? Because they can actually show us a good picture. And being the second brightest star in the night sky, it was important to the people in the ancient world, especially priests. And Canopus was the patron star of Eridu, one of, if not the oldest cities in Sumeria, making it one of the oldest cities ever in general, right? And allegedly founded by our boy Enki, the Sumerian god of creation. And it is unfortunate to see this picture, right? It's just so many of these Middle Eastern wars appear to be designed to erase their history, and that's just tragic. And so moving on, one interesting thing about Canopus is that it's a southern hemisphere star. It's only visible below latitude 37 degrees north. And the closer to 37 degrees north, it is only visible during certain times of the year. And so with that in mind, the ancient Persians called the star Sohil, which I've translated as Mr. Elusive, because I can only imagine that its appearance in the sky was a very heralded occasion. But Canopus is a Greek name, yet the star cannot be seen from Greece at all, right? So how does that work? And it works because the star can be seen from Egypt, and it was given the name Canopus by Ptolemy II Philadelphus, the second pharaoh of Ptolemaic Egypt, and he gave it this name while he ruled from Alexandria. And he used its return to the night sky to mark the date of his Ptolemaic festival, which was held every 4 years, the highlight of which was a grand procession in honor of the gods, beginning with the morning star, who the Greeks knew as Phosphorus. Phosphorus is a word applied not only to this star by the Greeks, but also to Mud City favorites Dionysus and Diana. And Ptolemaea being an Alexandrian festival, we can't forget that Alexandria is very close to the McHenry-Mecca alignment. And it's while he was in Alexandria that Ptolemy II named Canopus after the skipper of one of King Menelaus' ships during the Trojan War. And Canopus does turn into a minor character in Greek mythology, but really nothing all that special, which is kind of interesting given the importance of the star that bears his name, right? But the nautical theme doesn't end with Canopus being skipper of one of Menelaus' boats, right? The star Canopus is also the brightest star in the constellation Carina, itself 1/3 of the much larger constellation called Argo Navis, which is an astrological representation of the mythical boat Argos, which was sailed by Jason and his Argonauts on their quest to find the Golden Fleece and ensure Jason's kingship. And so the Carina is the keel, the literal backbone of a boat or ship. And the story of Jason and the Argonauts is really amazing because, of special note, one of crucial importance to Mud City, among their ranks, the Argonauts include Orpheus, the original Pied Piper, who was brought along to help Jason fend off the sirens.
Got it. Battle of the bands. We fight their music with our music.
And of course, the amazing thing about this is that there's a statue of Orpheus at Fort McHenry. Right, so McHenry and Mecca, the Black Stone, Canopus, Baltimore, Orpheus, all of these things are clearly coded together, at least in Mud City. And what it could all mean, of course, I have no idea. But it excites me because these connections just blow my mind. But now it's time to get back to Muhammad and his placing of the stone in the eastern corner. An action now connected to the douche via Muhammad's dedication to Hubble. But given the Black Stone's alignment to Canopus and Ptolemy II's Ptolemaea and its veneration of the morning star, this now also apophonetically connects Muhammad to Lucifer. Can't make this stuff up. Or maybe I just did. I don't know. But to me, this is just incredible. But maybe not as incredible as what the gatekeepers have to say about the Black Stone by omission. And that's that this stone may not be the same stone placed there by Muhammad at all. And so the story goes that in 930 AD, the Karmatians, a very militant sect of Muslims, sacked Mecca, and they stole the stone with the intention of placing it in their own Kaaba in a bid to shift the Hajj pilgrimage to their capital of Hajar. But they quickly learned that it was the place and not so much the stone, as the pilgrims kept right on pilgriming to Mecca. And so, butthurt but not stupid, they ransom the stone back after 23 years. And they return it by placing it in a sack and throwing it into a mosque drive-by style. And so the question I have is how did the fabulous mullahs of Mecca know that the Karmatians didn't just slip them a fugazi? A fugazi? Whatever. You know, a fake. Because 23 years is a long time. How did they verify that this was the genuine article in 952 AD? It is entirely possible that every Muslim pilgrim from 952 onward could be venerating the wrong stone for over 1,000 years now, right? That is just crazy. But maybe not as crazy as the idea that Mecca has no real ancient heritage at all, and that it was deliberately propped up as a focal point for the religious movement Muhammad and the caliphs that came after him used to infiltrate vast swaths of the Middle East and the Mediterranean. And again, this is pure speculation on my part, but I speculate this way because, to me, this happens so fast that it makes me think more of a series of well-orchestrated political coups than military conquest. You know, like dominoes ready to fall into place. Perhaps with the help and full support of the Catholic Church, who knows? And I also speculate about this because very little is known about the history of Mecca. There's not much in the way of archaeology, and the first non-Islamic mention of Mecca doesn't appear until the year 741. That's over 100 years after the death of Muhammad. And the author gets Mecca's location wrong. How does that happen as late as 741, There's just something not right here. And who knows, maybe this has something to do with the last observation about Mecca I'm about to make here. And that's as I was creeping around as I was creeping around Mecca here, I noticed these structures on the roof of the Grand Mosque. And so I don't know what they are, what their purpose is or anything. I only know that this is a hexagon. And while a cube such as the Kaaba can be rendered as a hexagon, hexagons also live in the center of six-pointed stars like this one. And cubes can also be unfolded into crosses like so. And so what we have here built up around the hexagon is a trinity of six-pointed religious stars. A subtle reminder, perhaps, that all these religions are following the same master. This guy, Saturn, father of the douche. All right, so that's all I have for this one. We'll have to do the Fort McHenry alignment crawl in the next one, right? But to close this one out with a couple of quick cherries, we're going to go back to where it all began by first revisiting Dighton Rock via the Nabataeans. Because when I was digging around the Nabataeans, I came across a writing sample of their language, and I don't know. There might be some smoke to the notion that there could have been some very ancient writing on there that was deliberately desecrated to hide it. There are at least a couple of interesting similarities here. So who knows? I don't know. What do you think? Hey, and then, of course, we're going to close it out at Gungywamp. And one thing I failed to note earlier is that Gungywamp sits along the banks of the River Thames. Hey, and I do think that this henge monument, or whatever it is, could be some kind of nautical marker for sailors traveling up and down the Thames, and could maybe even be a map of the world. Because I believe that the banks of the River Thames in Connecticut were once much higher in ancient times, right? And they could have abutted right along Gungywamp. I really love that idea. But not as much as I love this, right? Because as I was doing my diligence on Gungywamp, I found these diagrams of the standing stones. A top view and a side view. And now, I don't know about you, but from above, they kind of look like ones and zeros. Binary code. Right? And from the side, they resemble the audio waveform of my video editor. Right? That's crazy. What kind of message could Gungywamp be sending us? Unbelievable. All right, so that's all I have for this one. And so be sure to stay tuned for the next stone-throwing episode, right? And so remember, guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies, right? So until the next one, cheers.